Okay, as a little example, um, I've modeled this dumpster here. Let's see how you could use the plugin to unwrap this. So first of all, there's this button, create and link texture. It wouldn't need to be in a plugin, but I found that I was always repeating the same three actions anyway, so it's nice to just have one button. There we go. So it's just created a texture, filled it with some pixels, and it's not done any mapping yet, but these are some steps that you would have to take manually. So let's dive into using the actual plugin. So the main thing is, if you have a model that you want to paint some pixels on, you often want the pixels to follow the shape of the model. There are some obvious features here where you would say, okay, these lines, it would be nice if pixels aligned with them. For example, this side of the lid here, it would be nice if pixels ran straight along that side and you don't have these little half pixels here. That's the kind of stuff that you run into when you want to do this lo-fi pixel art 3D style. The same for the trim of the box here below and these trims on the side. It would just be nice if the pixels lined up to them in a nice way. So that's kind of the main thing that this plugin helps with. You can do it by hand, of course. If you grab, for example, a part of this trim, you can go into the UV map and drag around the vertices. Let's actually get rid of everything else real quick and just take this trim and unwrap it. Okay, now we have something vaguely rectangular looking. This is without the plugin. These are the steps that you would have to do. It's not straight because the geometry is not entirely straight, so Blender has very helpfully curved it for you, which is not something you want when you do this kind of modeling. So there is the UV squares plugin which could solve this. It's either that or you can go in by hand. If you set snap to corner, you can like start grabbing pixels, but they don't really move nicely. Like you would have to do it one vertex at a time, which is very tedious. Also, at the same time, you're then going to have to keep an eye on your model and see like, oh, how is the pixel density, so to say, like, are pixels roughly the same size everywhere along the model? And if not, you have to drag it around to make pixels the same size. It's possible, but it's kind of a tedious job. And so then the main operator in the plugin, and I think the one that works pretty well to do exactly this, is this button over here that says Unwrap Grid. It basically just does that. It uses the pixels per unit that you set up here. So this is, we want 10 pixels per world unit as like pixel density, and I will try to stick to that. And then as long as your selection consists of quads only, it's actually pretty easy to do the math and to just realize that, this needs to be 2 pixels, this needs to be 10 pixels long, and then to have the pixels neatly aligned to every edge. So, okay, unwrap grid, boom. Okay, apparently doing the math of 10 pixels per unit, the plugin has calculated that it's actually best to have 1 pixel height running along the side here. So we can use this for any kind of strip of rectangles. The same situation for the body of the dumpster down here. There we go. And as you see here on the UV map, everything is neatly aligned to the pixels. And the density is the same as it is up there on the edge of the lid. Honestly, this button saves me so much time. The other buttons, half of them make Blender crash, but this button right here, Unwrap Grid, is amazing. As long as you have a selection that consists only of quads, it does usually exactly what you want for this type of art. But I'll go through some of the other buttons as well, just for fun. So the top of the lid is actually not quads because it has these little beveled edges here. For those situations, you kind of probably still want the edges to align with pixels, and it's not hard to come up with how. Again, you could do a manual unwrap. Then you could scale it to your desired size, having a look at, okay, this is roughly the same size. But then the pixels would be kind of jank because the beveled edges got snapped to pixels, so that's also not good. So if you for that, I have this button that's a basic unwrap. It just does that. It unwraps using Blender default unwrap, and then it scales to the correct pixel resolution. So what you get is this. You can see here that these little beveled edges are not snapped to pixels, because that's usually not what you want. You just want it to be like a straight projection scaled to your desired pixel density. And then the edges, the bounds of the UV island are snapped to whole pixels. So, okay, so just continuing along the model, there is this trim up here. Just insert a single seam and then go under a grid. That looks pretty good. Sometimes you get these diagonal looking things. That's just because of how texture mapping works. Often I don't mind so much. I try to just paint over them in the texture so you don't see them, but if you insert extra edges, you can kind of prevent it a little bit. Like you see here, I made these two loop cuts, and now the things are much less jaggy looking, so that's one way to do it. Otherwise, if you have a shape like this, what is this called? A trapezoid, I guess. It's just, you can't really map square pixels onto that, so there's not really a solution. Except just, yeah, insert more edges. That will kind of straighten it out, as you can see. Okay. There's one more operator that's useful sometimes in these models. Sometimes you just have little bits of the model that are so small that you're not really going to paint a texture there. So for that, there is this unwrap to single pixel button, which is basically like a flood fill. It just takes this area you selected and maps it all onto a single pixel, so that whatever ends up in there will just be a single color. And it's useful for these kind of trims just to get them out of the way. Same, I guess, with these little handles on the side. Those can just be a single pixel. Oh, now I made them the same pixel. Now I made them the same color as this other trim because I had them selected. So actually for that, there's this other button that says Island to Free Space, which is if you just want to move something to a new, fresh part of the UV map. The basic premise of this plugin is that you don't care about the size of your texture. It's not about efficiently packing things, it's about quickly being able to start painting. If you work with these kind of pixel art textures, like the resolution is like maybe 64 by 64 pixels or maybe 128 by 128, like who cares if it's double? As long as you just can dump your UV islands on there, start painting, it doesn't matter if there's a lot of wasted space. Honestly, if you're going to use this in a game, you might want to use something like Sprite UV2 to repack all the textures into an Atlas texture, and that will get rid of all the wasted space anyway. So I feel like there is no point in optimizing texture use so early on. Which is why kind of all these operators just, you know, find some free space on the UV map and just dump the island there, and they're not concerned with efficiently packing. Okay, well, this is actually starting to look quite good. The pixels are neatly aligning. I just have to do a couple more like single color things, like the bottom of this trim. So I'm also just gonna hit unwrap the single pixel. The bottom of the dumpster, do we want to paint that? I guess maybe we do want to paint it. Could be that the dumpster falls over in a game and we see the bottom, so I'm also just going to do basic unwrap. You can see here that the textures are not entirely aligning around the corner. Same for the top, actually. If you want the pixels to align across a corner, sometimes you can just play around a little bit with the density. Let's say set it to 14. This can be tricky. Honestly, I don't know the solution here. You would have to insert an edge along this side, an edge here to make sure that those pixels would all align. Actually, we can just do that real quick. And there. Let's hide the wheels for a second. Okay, now as you can see, this surface does consist of a bunch of quads and little triangles. So now if we hit unwrap grid, that might actually work. And what unwrapped grid does, if there's little triangles attached, it will just do the sensible thing and connect the triangles up to the rest of the quads. So you see that the quads have been mapped to nice rectangular sections here that match with pixels, and the triangles are just filled in the corners. And now the whole thing matches across the seams, as you can see, across the corners of the model. The pixels line up nicely. Do we want to do the same thing with the top? I guess that allows us to paint some nice pictures, so I'm going to do the same thing with the top, is inserting some extra edges to make everything nicely rectangular. Unwrap grid. And every time you hit unwrap grid, it's gonna unwrap it and find a clean part of the UV map to map it to. So you don't have to worry about manually stacking the UV islands or finding free space. It doesn't do it in a super efficient way. As you can see, half the UV map is empty, but that's just like working space. That's kind of nice to have. All right, this is looking quite good. I'm wondering if these could match up nicely. Maybe for that, since they're a little bit broader at the bottom, I have to kind of lower the density for them manually. There we go. And now you see that the pixels here along the top also line up nicely. Okay. So I've been saying like, oh, this plugin is not concerned with texture space use, blah, blah, blah. But, just for pure work satisfaction, it seems kind of weird if this UV island is just floating in the middle of the UV map here. So there is an option to repack the islands actually. I'll get into this later, but probably don't check this. Okay, you click repack islands here, and it actually, as you can see, it kind of just stuffed all the islands to the bottom of the UV map here. It's still not super efficient, but at least they're not floating up in the middle of nowhere in the UV map. They're just like all sort of neatly packed. Okay, I guess that concludes very basic UV unwrapping. And I'll get into painting next. Okay, I also want to show you a little bit of the painting workflow that I use. I've begun to paint stuff directly in Blender. The texture paint tool is not ideal for pixel art, but honestly, staying in the same tool and being able to go back and forth between a little bit of modeling and a little bit of texturing, I found super useful. Also because with these pixel art 3D things, there is often kind of an interaction between the texturing and the modeling. You might start painting and then decide that some detail is better as a geometry feature, so then you quickly go back and model it, and then you continue painting. Or the other way around, you decide that something is not worth having geometry, you just paint it on there, so you can quickly go back and forth between geometry and painting. And I feel like it's worth dealing with the less than ideal tools here. So usually the way I start is I just do a flood fill with some color, like base color of the model. I don't know, I guess sometimes these dumpsters are green, so I just kind of fill it with green. Apparently I have not correctly unwrapped these legs, wheels, so I'm just going to hit unwrap the single pixel, done, back to painting, fill. There you go. See, this was already an instance of going back and forth between texture painting and modeling real quick to just fix something. So now we have the model. I don't know, I'm not going to do a super detailed job here, but let's just say you wanted to have some edge highlighting. You can just paint that straight on there. And my style is pretty messy, so I usually just like, I don't know, just slap some color on there. It's important to set the strengths to 1 if you want real pixel art. Still, Blender will do this weird anti-aliasing sometimes. It's not ideal. You will get like half transparent pixels, or at least not exactly the color that you picked, but fine. Okay, so just some quick edge highlighting. Again, I'm doing this in a pretty messy way because that's just my style, and I usually clean it up later anyway if it's too messy. There we go. Maybe around this trim too. And then I always like to, make things look a bit grimy, so I don't know, maybe something like this. Yeah, that's flat. Adding some grime along the bottom. Now, one trick that the plugin can do, which is quite useful for this, is let's say you've been drawing some grime along the bottom here, and you realize that the back, you just want the same thing. Like often models are symmetrical, and instead of like pixeling everything twice, you could just mirror it along the back. Let me actually demonstrate the folding tool on a new model real quick to show what it does. So let's say we have a wheel that looks something like this. Maybe there's a tire on it. Like that, and another cut along the side. I don't know, you might have something like this as a wheel. Put a quick texture on there. We need one scene. And let's say we just wanted to color these in a single color. Okay. And now, instead of painting along the entire wheel, if you would, since it has 8 sections, if you would say 8 folds and fold it along X, now they're all using the same bit of texture space. So if you go into texture painting and you paint on it, you see that you're painting on the whole wheel. So now if you do some, I don't know, like some profile on the tire, you could see that it wraps nicely around the whole thing immediately. That's just to illustrate. Let's go back to the dumpster. So I've applied this principle to the outside of the dumpster going around here. When texture painting, there is this E shortcut that you can use to pick a color. It picks the color from your actual screen, so this only works if you've set shading to flat, because otherwise you will pick a shaded color. But if you've set shading to flat, I've had decent results just like picking colors straight from another place on the model and kind of using those. Let's draw some handles, maybe. I think maybe here, something like that. Maybe there's some handles in the front. Here you see we kind of run into this malformed pixel issue, but honestly, I don't mind. Like when you zoom out and when you would view this in the game, it still looks nice and chunky. So yeah, let's do the bottom real quick. And because again, I feel like this will be symmetrical anyway, what I'm going to do is fold that also. And you can see here that they're mapped out in the UV map. And I'm going to fold them in 2, mirrored both in X and in Y, and you see that now they're they're all mapped to 1/4 of the previous map. The only thing is I've lost these little triangles at the corners, so I'm just going to quickly unpin them, reselect everything, and go unwrap extend, which kind of puts triangles back next to the quads that they belong to. Okay, I guess time to paint in the bottom. Let's say it's like, let's pretend this is dirt on the bottom. Okay, and there we go. We have quickly drawn some pixels onto the dumpster with a little bit of help of the plugin. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching.